The brand new rifle on that rack cannot shoot the bullet on the shelf behind it. Same 7mm bore, 4 feet apart, same store. The Hornady box says that bullet needs 1 turn in 8.5 inches. The new 7mm Remington Magnum spins 1 in 9.5. Slower than the minimum the bullet maker prints on its own packaging. Magnum money in 2026 for a rifle cut to a 1962 rulebook. 8 measurements against the cartridge that replaced it. The old one wins several: ammunition, price, even recoil. 7 and 8 are where this turns. Subscribe if you want the spec sheet instead of the marketing copy. Measurement 1, muzzle velocity and energy, same bullet weight class, same barrel length, using numbers the ammunition makers publish themselves. Hornady's Precision Hunter Load in 7mm PRC pushes a 175 grain ELDX at 3,000 feet per second from a 24-inch barrel. That is somewhere near 3,500 foot-pounds at the muzzle. In 7mm Remington Magnum, Federal's Fusion at the same 175 grains is advertised around 2,760 feet per second, and the hotter factory offerings in that weight land closer to 2,860. Move the old cartridge down to a 162 grain ELDX, and it runs about 2,940 feet per second, roughly 3,180 foot-pounds. So there is a gap. It is real and it is measurable. It is also, in the field, close to meaningless. 140 feet per second and 300 foot-pounds at the muzzle does not change what happens inside a whitetail at 200 yards, and it does not change what happens to an elk at 300. On a bull's lungs, 3,180 foot-pounds and 3,500 foot-pounds are the same event. Anyone building a video on this number alone is padding. And I have to give you the other half of it because it exists and it cuts against me. Drop to lighter bullets and the old cartridge wins outright. Federal's terminal ascent at 155 grains out of a 7mm Remington Magnum is still moving 67 feet per second faster at 500 yards than Hornady's 154 grain load out of the PRC, out at 500 yards, not at the muzzle where nobody shoots anything. If light for caliber is how you hunt, the 64-year-old cartridge is the faster one, and this entire argument does not apply to you. One more thing about published velocity, and it applies to both of them. The number on the box is the number from a test barrel. Outdoor Life chronographed the 180 grain match load in 7mm PRC across a 10-shot string out of 2 different 24-inch rifles and averaged 2,927 feet per second with a standard deviation under 9. The box says 2,975. That is a well-behaved load performing about 50 feet per second under its advertised number, which is normal and which nobody tells you. There was also a documented stretch in 2024 where some lots of that Hornady hunting ammunition came in under the 3,000 mark, which the shooting press picked apart at the time. So take every advertised velocity in this video with a small discount, mine included. And it gets worse for the old cartridge on this point, not better. Speer's Ballistics Lab has reported spreads of 400 to 700 feet per second between individual sporting rifles chambered in 7mm Remington Magnum, firing the same ammunition, 400 feet per second rifle to rifle. That is not a knock on the cartridge. It is what happens across 64 years of different barrel lengths, different chambers, different throats, and different factories all wearing the same name on the barrel. But it means that the number on the box has almost nothing to do with the number your particular rifle produces, and if you have never put a chronograph in front of yours, you do not know what you own. A custom shop that cut a 7mm PRC barrel down from 26 inches to 16, measuring velocity every 2 inches on the way, published exactly the kind of data that almost nobody publishes for the old Magnum. 175 grain hunting bullets right at 3,000 feet per second at 26 inches, and a 195 grain bullet still leaving at about 2,900. That is a third party with a chronograph and a declared barrel length. It is worth more than every advertised number in this segment combined. Measurement 2. Powder. How much of it each cartridge burns to get where it is going? The 7mm Remington Magnum holds about 82 grains of water in its case. The 7mm PRC holds somewhere around 68.5 to 72. The newer cartridge is meaningfully smaller, and it lands in the same performance neighborhood. That is efficiency, and efficiency is not a marketing word here. It is less powder pushed down the same bore to do the same job. Reloaders who work with both report the same thing, and I will label that for what it is, which is community reporting rather than a controlled study. But the case capacity numbers themselves are published spec, and they are not close. Measurement 3, recoil. And this one goes against me, so here it is straight. Outdoor Life published calculated recoil for both in a 7-pound rifle, 7mm Remington Magnum with a 162 grain bullet, 29.4 foot-pounds, 7mm PRC with a 175 grain bullet, 33.9 foot-pounds. The new cartridge kicks harder, 4.5 foot-pounds harder in the same weight gun. There is a reason, and the reason is the entire point of this video, so hold on to it. The PRC recoils more because it is throwing a heavier bullet faster. It is not less efficient. It is doing more work, but if what you wanted out of a modern cartridge was a gentler shove into your shoulder, you did not get it, and I am not going to pretend the arithmetic says otherwise. If recoil is your limiting factor, neither of these is your answer, and you should be looking at a different bore diameter entirely. Measurement 4, barrel life. And I am going to disappoint you here on purpose. There is no published dated controlled measurement of throat erosion in hunting use for either of these cartridges that I can point you to. What exists is estimate and community experience, somewhere around 1,200 to 1,600 rounds for the 7mm Remington Magnum, somewhere around 1,200 to 2,000 for the PRC. That is a tie with a soft edge, and it is built on reports, not on a lab. Hornady's own launch material talks about temperature-stable propellants and longer barrel life, and that is the manufacturer's claim, not a finding. I am telling you it is a claim because it is a claim. Anybody who hands you a hard barrel life number for either of these and does not show you the test is making it up. If you are a hunter, you will not shoot either barrel out. This measurement does not decide anything, and I am not going to inflate it so that it does. Measurement 5. Ammunition. And here the old cartridge does not just win, it wins so hard that it is the strongest argument against everything else I am about to say. Counting only the major names, Federal, Remington, Hornady, Winchester, Barnes, the 7mm Remington Magnum has more than 40 factory loads. Those same 5 companies offer roughly 14 in 7mm PRC. Open it up past the majors and you are looking at more than 30 brands loading the old Magnum in bullet weights from 139 to 180 grains. Price, as of this year, runs roughly $1.40 to $5 a round, depending on what you are buying. The PRC runs about $2.14 to $7 a round. Now put that in the only place it matters. It is opening morning, you are 4 hours from home, and your ammunition is on the kitchen table. You walk into a small-town hardware store in Montana or Pennsylvania and ask what they have in 7mm. They have 7mm Remington Magnum. They will have it in 1998. They had it in 2020. They have it now. The odds that a counter in a town of 800 people stocks 7mm PRC in 2026 are not good. That is not a small consideration, and I am not going to wave it away. For a certain kind of hunter, that single fact ends the argument in favor of the old cartridge, and it should. I sold rifles across a counter to men who saved for a year to buy one, and I have watched that exact scene from the other side of the glass more times than I can count. Nobody comes back to complain that they could not find ammunition for a 7mm Remington Magnum. 64 years of continuous production buys you something no new cartridge can buy at any price, and what it buys you is the certainty that the shelf will have it. So let me kill the easy version of this argument before somebody else does. This cartridge is not dead, it is not discontinued, it is not weak. It does not fail on elk, and it does not wound deer. If a man walks up a mountain with one, he is not undergunned, and he never was, and anybody telling you different is selling you a rifle. Everything I am about to show you sits on top of that, not instead of it. Measurement 6. Rifles. Where the new guns are actually going. The 7mm Remington Magnum is still chambered by Tikka, Browning, Bergara, Christensen, Savage, Weatherby, Sacco, Mossberg, Winchester, Ruger, Nosler. Nobody has walked away from it. Nobody has announced they are dropping it, and I am not going to imply that they have. But look at where the PRC went in 4 years. Approved by SAMI in June of 2022, announced publicly that fall, and positioned by Hornady to sit between their own 6.5 PRC and their 300 PRC. Their marketing director called it, in their words, the first truly modern 7mm Magnum. That is a company describing its own product, and I am reading it to you as a claim, not as a finding. But the claim tells you what they were aiming at, and what they were aiming at was not more velocity. Their launch material talks about long, heavy-for-caliber bullets in a standard-length action and temperature-stable powder. That is the whole design brief in one sentence, and every measurement in this video traces back to it. The gun press agreed at the time. Guns and Ammo named it Ammunition of the Year for 2023, and the NRA gave it a golden bullseye. Awards do not make a cartridge good, but they are a signal about which way an industry is about to move, and the industry moved. Hornady launched it with 3 loads. In 2023, Federal and Remington came in. In 2024, Nosler added ammunition and brass, and Federal added a tipped fusion. In 2025, Fiocchi and Barnes came in. This year, Berger added 2 hunting loads, including a 195 grain, Barnes added another, and Remington put it in core locked, which is about as mainstream as an American hunting cartridge gets. Winchester has announced a load, and I will say announced rather than on the shelf, because announced is what I can confirm. On the rifle side, the count that gets repeated in the gun press is somewhere near 30 manufacturers, and I have not personally audited that number, so take it as the direction rather than the census. What I can name is the list: Christensen, Fierce, Seekins, Savage, Mossberg, Ruger, Weatherby, Bergara, Springfield, Proof, Gunworks. 4 years from SAMI approval to core locked is not a fad. That is the trajectory that lets you say the word obsolete without saying the word dead. The old cartridge is not leaving. The new development is simply not happening there anymore. Which brings me to the 2 measurements this whole thing has been walking toward. Before I give them to you, one thing. This channel takes no money from any of these companies. No affiliate links, no sponsorships, nobody sends me rifles. And that is exactly why I can spend 6 minutes telling you the cartridge in my title beats its replacement on ammunition, on price, and on recoil. Honesty is the only thing this channel has to sell. Measurement 7, throat length and how far a bullet can be seated. The 7mm Remington Magnum was standardized with a maximum cartridge length of 3.290 inches in an era when a heavy 7mm bullet was a short, blunt thing. The 7mm PRC was drawn at 3.340 inches on a 2.280-inch case with a 30-degree shoulder, and it was drawn with a long throat on purpose. 50 thousandths of an inch does not sound like a villain. Here is what it means in practice. A modern high ballistic coefficient hunting bullet is long. Not heavier for its weight, longer because the aerodynamic shape that makes it hold velocity downrange lives out in front of the bearing surface. When you seat a long bullet into a case with a short throat and a fixed magazine length, the base of that bullet goes down into the powder column and eats the space the powder needs. You lose capacity, you lose velocity, and you get pressure behaving in ways nobody wants. The old case has more room for powder and less room to put a long bullet where a long bullet needs to go. The new one was cut the other way around. And that leads straight into the number that decides it. Measurement 8. Twist rate. The number I opened with, rifling twist, is how far a bullet travels down the barrel for one full rotation. 1 and 9.5 means one full spin every 9.5 inches. It is the number that determines whether a bullet flies point forward or wobbles, and it is not a preference, it is physics, and long bullets need more of it. Here is the part nobody explains at the counter. What decides how much spin a bullet needs is not its weight, it is its length. And the entire direction of bullet design over the last 15 years has been toward longer bullets, long sharp noses and long tapered tails, because that shape holds velocity downrange and drifts less in wind. That shape is what a high ballistic coefficient physically is. So every step the industry took toward better long-range bullets was also a step toward bullets that need a faster twist. The rifle standardized before that shift got left on the wrong side of it. A barrel does not know what year it is. It spins what it was cut to spin, and if the bullet is longer than the spin can handle, that bullet leaves the muzzle slightly sideways and never fully recovers. You do not see it as a failure. You see it as a rifle that groups fine with one load and mysteriously will not group with the expensive one. And you blame the ammunition, or you blame yourself. The 7mm Remington Magnum was standardized in an era of shorter bullets, and it was given a slower twist to match. CIP listed at 1 in 9.49. Walk the 2026 catalogs and you find the same thing again and again. Tikka's T3X, 1 in 9.5. Bergara's B14, 1 in 9.5. Sako, 1 in 9.5. Weatherby's Vanguard, 1 in 9.5. There are exceptions. Browning's Hell's Canyon has been built at 1 in 8, but the standard, the thing you will find hanging on a rack, is 1 in 9.5. The 7mm PRC's SAMI specification is 1 in 8, not as an upgrade, not as a custom option, as the spec. Now go back to the ammunition box. Horn 80 specifies a minimum of 1 in 8.5 twist for the 175 grain ELDX. That requirement is printed right on the packaging, which means the standard factory 7mm Remington Magnum at 1 in 9.5 is slower than the minimum the bullet maker asks for. American Rifleman made the same point from the other direction. The 7mm PRC is the SAMI-approved 7mm that comes with both the 1 in 8 twist and a throat long enough for today's highest BC bullets at the same time. And you can watch the consequence inside a single product line. In Hornady's Precision Hunter lineup, the 7mm PRC gets the 175 grain ELDX. The 7mm Remington Magnum stops at 162 grains. Same company, same shelf. The old cartridge simply does not get the better bullet, and the reason is the chamber and the twist. And here is the part that should bother you, because it is the part that still bothers me. Nobody lied to anybody. Every number in this segment is published. The twist is in the catalog. The bullet requirement is on the box. SAMI's specification is a public document. Not one company in this story hit a single figure. They published all of it in a place a hunter will never look, in a unit a hunter was never taught to care about, and then they let him carry the rifle to the register. That is not a scandal. It is worse than a scandal because there is nothing to sue over and nothing to recall. The whole thing runs on the safe assumption that the man paying for the rifle will never cross-reference two numbers printed 4 feet apart. Hunters on the forums have been running into this for 2 or 3 years now. Men with a 1 in 9.5 Tikka or Bergara reporting that the heavy pill will not group and going back down to 162. I want to be careful here. That is community reporting, not a controlled test, and I cannot verify any single account of it. But it points the same direction as the manufacturer's own printed requirement, and the manufacturer's requirement is not a rumor. It is a spec. So here is the verdict, and it is more specific than my title has room for. If you buy a brand new 7mm Remington Magnum in 2026, you are buying a rifle that cannot use the best half of the bullets made for its own bore diameter. Not because it is weak, because it was standardized in 1962 around a bullet shape that stopped being the state-of-the-art about 15 years ago, and the factories kept cutting barrels to the 1962 number. Under 400 yards with a 140 to 162 grain bullet on a deer or an elk, none of this will cost you an animal. That is the honest boundary of the argument, and I am drawing it myself rather than making you draw it in the comments. Past 400 or 500 yards, or with the heavy high BC bullets that the entire industry has spent a decade developing, the old chamber cannot go where the new one goes. The exception is real, and it is the man I described at the hardware store. If you hunt inside 300 yards, if you are ever going to need to buy ammunition in a town you have never been to, if your rifle needs to work off a shelf that stocks whatever it stocks, buy the 7mm Remington Magnum and never think about it again. That is not a consolation prize. 40 loads, 30 brands, and $1.40 a round is a genuine advantage the PRC will not match for years. And if you already own one, do not sell it. I mean that. The people who have looked hardest at these two cartridges land in the same place. There is no case for trading a rifle you already shoot well. Feed it a 162 grain bullet, which your 1 and 9.5 barrel handles fine, and you have a rifle that will kill anything on this continent for as long as you can carry it. If you want the heavy bullets badly enough, a rebarrel at 1 and 8 costs a fraction of a new rifle. Nothing about this argument requires you to spend money on a gun you already have. This is a video about the purchase, not about the cartridge in your safe. Here's the part that should make you tilt your head, though. In 1962, when Remington launched this cartridge alongside the Model 700, it did to another Magnum exactly what the PRC is doing to it now. The .264 Winchester Magnum had come out 4 years earlier, and it was fast, but it was tied to lighter bullets. The 7mm Remington Magnum came in throwing 175 grain bullets, took the market, and the .264 went into a decline it never recovered from. Winchester answered with the .300 Winchester Magnum the following year, and the .264 was not the only casualty. Remington had introduced the .280 Remington just 5 years before, a fine 7mm that hunters still speak well of, and their own new Magnum ran it over commercially in the same stretch. Remington put a cartridge in the market that killed the competition's Magnum and wounded its own non-Magnum on the way past. The cartridge that is being pushed aside today is the cartridge that did the pushing, and it won the same way it is now losing, with a heavier bullet that the other rifle could not use. And it will happen again. There is already a newer 7mm on the market, and in a side-by-side test using identical Federal Fusion ammunition, it beat the PRC by nearly 200 feet per second out of a shorter barrel. Whatever you buy this year will be somebody's obsolete cartridge eventually. That is not a reason to buy nothing. It is a reason to buy the one that can use the bullets that exist right now. 1 and 8.5 printed on a box. 1 and 9.5 cut into a barrel. Both numbers published, neither one explained. 64 years apart on the same shelf. The 7mm Remington Magnum will kill your elk. It just cannot shoot the bullet on the shelf 4 feet away. And in 2026, nobody is building you a new rifle that can fix that.